Awesome. I'm hitting record here. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Emma Shapiro, and I'm a physical therapist. And I am here with Erwin Sequia of Match Fit Performance. And he is a physical therapist in OCS, right?
SES.
SES, and a bunch of other credentials too. And he has a super cool background. He gets to work with like amazing athletes in New York and potentially on other sides of the country here too. But the reason why I have him on today is that I just recently finished the New Grad Success Summit, and a lot of people reached out to me and they said, what about starting my own practice? What about doing a cash-based practice? And I have met Erwin before, and his story resonated with me as just a perfect example of the smart way to transition into a cash-based practice. And he is going to tell you about his hurdles. This is not easy, and that's what I really like about his story is that he opens up the curtain and doesn't just only show you all the shiny bells and whistles of running your own practice, but it's far from easy. And so I really want him to come on and share his story. So what I think, Erwin, is I thought we'd start with just sort of how you always felt as a new grad that you wanted to do a cash practice, but instead of jumping in, you sort of had some mentorship at first to learn the ropes. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. In terms of mentorship, I basically tried to reach out to as many people as I could and just get as many resources as possible in my corner. So a lot of it was I spent Googling. I spent a lot of time Googling between having the information out of our third year. So I was at NYU, and I finished in 2013, and we had a business class. But the primary education for that class was to generate a business plan and also to help you realize how much effort, not just sweat equity, but financial equity that you have to sink into a practice depending on how you want to run it. So chatting with one of my professors, a clinician that I'd worked with on affiliation, but also spending a ton of time Googling anything and everything that I could get my hands on in order to start working in a cash-based setting. And so, between going out and asking for help, which for me, like I'm a pretty proud person, so it takes a lot for me to kind of admit that I do need help. But I knew that I was stepping into this realm essentially that I just had zero idea about what I was doing. So in order to learn anything, I tried to get as much reading material and as much help as possible. So in terms of resources and mentors, Chris Johnson, who runs Aaron PT out in Seattle, like we spent a couple of phone calls chatting. Dr. Weaver at NYU also helped me out. Marcus Foreman I think it's Foreman and Bart's PT or Centurion PT here in New York City. But yeah, they were the ones that kind of got me rolling, got me started.
Awesome. So you sort of just, did some research, looked at clinics that you sort of would want to implement, emulate something that was similar to what you wanted to do. And then you reached out and tried to talk with them. Now, do you want to share your first job? You sort of strategically chose that as well, right? To get a little bit of experience to sort of learn the behind the scenes.
Yeah. So in terms of, that's a great point. So my first job was a high volume mill. I used to work with 4 to 6 clients an hour. For those of you who are familiar with New York City, I worked at a practice just by Grand Central. So Grand Central is a big transit hub in New York City, and everybody can pass in and out of it. It's super accessible. What was crazy was that when people, as a new grad, I wanted to help a ton of people, but what kind of held me back was that when people would show up 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour late because the MTA is terrible, because public transit would not always sync up with schedule. So people would show up 20 minutes, 30 minutes late, maybe sometimes an hour late, but I didn't want to turn them away because I wanted to work with them. So part of it was a little bit of my own doing. The original model of the schedule was 20-minute treats, and you had 45-minute evals, but I had so much on my plate in terms of trying to balance working with one person with my hands on them and then trying to coach 2 or 3 other people across the room, like, yeah, that's how you lunge, like that's how you squat. Okay, do 3 more sets or 2 more sets, or grab the band and yeah, keep going, like over there. And it was kind of frustrating. It was very frustrating for me, and it kind of sucked just to see the care that was happening and the stuff that behind the scenes, basically, that, you know, in terms of billing and just the work that I was putting into it, but not getting a ton out of it. So I ended up burning out a ton, like pretty hard. I think twice over the time that I was there, but it was tough, and it opened my eyes for sure to what we were exposed to.
Definitely. So can you, for someone who's, you know, maybe a new grad or maybe recent grad or even a seasoned professional right now, and please, there's 4 of you amazing people on right now, so feel free to comment below, put in the chat or the Q&A any questions you have, and Erwin's open to answering them. But so for Erwin, as you transitioned, like how did you, because I really think that you thoughtfully transitioned from being a regular clinician to starting your own practice. Can you describe a little bit that process and how you did that? Because it can be really costly to like jump right in. And I really don't think that you or myself even advocate that. Like you should test the water first.
No, definitely test the waters. I think it depends on, and this is a discussion that I have with most clinicians, but it really depends on your risk averseness, and it depends on how much risk you're willing to take. So behind just finishing physical therapy school, I knew exactly where I wanted to be in 5 years, either to be managing somebody else's practice or be in charge of my own. And so what I started looking around for were opportunities to minimize overhead. So by overhead, basically how much I have to sink into the practice monthly in order to break even, and then versus making a profit. And so when you think about, you know, basic bookkeeping, which I'm the worst at, my business partner is so good at it. I'm super lucky. She's actually sitting behind me right now. She's laughing while she's writing some emails. Being able to make sure that you are even is great, but we start businesses, and businesses run because we want to make a profit. And especially as new grads and even as physical therapists, we're all very genuinely good people. And so sometimes it gets hard to want to push into the profit, and trying to reframe this idea of, okay, I need to make money. How can I make money? But how can I do it as genuinely as possible and authentically as possible without overbilling insurance, things that I've seen, or even like, basically committing insurance fraud. But so yeah, for me, what I started with was, or what Rena and I started with was, we ran around to basically 13 CrossFit gyms in New York City, which at the time I guess it's blown up since it hasn't gotten too much bigger. It's probably closer to like 20, 25, but the amount of CrossFit gyms that I walked into and had to learn how to pitch on the fly was one of kind of the most frustrating things, but also it was super educational in the sense of learning how to fail and being able to be comfortable with, well, not be comfortable because it was very uncomfortable, but be able to figure out what it is to pitch and how to really press people's buttons and find out what people's needs are. So going into my first CrossFit gym on the Upper East Side, I remember it was CrossFit Metropolis. I think it's right around the corner from where we are now. But I walked in, there's one guy in there. I asked to speak to the manager, and they were like, yeah, I'm the manager. And I was like, yeah, do you guys have a physical therapist on staff? I think you could really use one. And the guy just laughed at me and basically nicely told me to fuck off. So I was like, oh, what do I do? Like, how do I iterate this need, and how do I iterate the value that I can provide? So in addition to all of the Googling, then I also had to learn very quickly, like, how do I pitch? How do I demonstrate value as quickly as possible with a cold call? Like, even just walking into a gym and just saying like, hey, this is me. Like, yeah, that was a huge process. But eventually we struck gold with 2 CrossFit gyms here in New York City. One of them, we still have a relationship. We're here in their gym right now. The other one is in Astoria. So the 2 CrossFit gyms are Concrete Jungle, Grit, and CrossFit Dynamics, which is in Astoria. So the owner, we were able to build a really good relationship with those owners and continue to, we basically just had so mumuch trust that we were able to hang out in the space, work with the coaches, and then start to build that relationship. Yeah.
I think that's because I think a lot of people don't realize, and for those of you on, feel free to put in the chat or the Q&A, what type of practice are you looking to start? Like, is it a cash based? Are you, looking to do pediatrics? Any questions about pitching? Because Erwin is really the pitch guy, and I'll have him dive a little bit into the dynamics of how he changed his wording. But I think that's the biggest takeaway, is that there's a lot of different pieces that you have to manage in when you do your own practice, and it's a huge learning curve. So trying to get mentorship, but then also the next big variable is building these relationships. How do you find your clients? And really the only way is to suck it up and talk to gyms, talk to CrossFit gyms, or you can do it the other way, which would be like websites, social media, things like that. But I really think that the in-person way is a really smart way, because these gyms have already built their brand. They've already built in the circulation of people, and they always say that the best clients are the clients you already have, and then you just keep getting more profits and more opportunities from those same clients. And so that's the same mentality. But do you want to talk, Erwin, a little bit about the wording of the pitch? Because I remember you went to like multiple gyms, and they didn't really understand the value of a therapist, and so you had to think outside of the box. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I'll say a disclaimer first, that I think a lot of pitching, it's not necessarily luck, but it really has to do with a couple of things in our experience. It has to do with timing. It has to do with your ability to demonstrate value and basically just communicate. So timing and communication skills are really, really important. So our pitch evolved from, hey, I'm a physical therapist, I think you should have a physical therapist on staff because it would help bolster the profile of your gym, to not even jumping immediately to that conclusion and just asking about injury rates, frequently common injuries that most of their athletes experience, if they had any injuries, and even sometimes I think the third piece, I'm going to take a step back before I finish that sentence, but I think the third piece is also culture. So it's all between timing, communication, and culture. Sometimes the gym or the facility that you're trying to get in might not necessarily fit who you are as a person. So what I've also seen too is, especially with people that are looking to get involved in spaces, is they might not necessarily be the best fit for the gym. Whether or not it's personality, whether or not, it kind of stinks, and it's almost a little superficial, but if you don't fit the brand, that also can kind of bring hesitance. But if you're if you're still really good with communicating and timing, you might be able to overcome that hurdle, especially. So the reason I have that disclaimer is because the 2 gyms that we are still affiliated with, one of the owners at Concrete Jungle ran track at Auburn. So he knew the value of having a really, really good healthcare professional on site and somebody that really knew their stuff. And on top of that, I was a new grad. So I finished in 2013. I graduated, and I literally walked out to every single gym that I could find to see, if we could get into any space. And so from a value standpoint, it was very hard for me to be like, this is what I do. I know what I'm doing. Yeah. And if I could go back in time and talk to myself, I'd courageous and make more asks and just maybe tweak some of those, the things that I had said first time. But again, I think it's timing. So the same thing was with CrossFit Dynamics. One of the owners was like, "Oh, you're a physical therapist?" He's like, "That's exactly who we need." Side note: this was also the time, if any of you are followed CrossFit, like in the early 2010s, Kelly Starrett was huge in San Francisco, so it was like a very big West Coast thing. And when we had done our market analysis in New York City, there were 0 therapists in any gyms, or not the one that we had known about. So we were kind of also ahead of the curve. So when we think about it, if your pitch isn't on point, like, and you're ahead of the curve, people are going to be like, "What is this? Like, what's the point of this?" And so, but going back to it all, we ended up fitting in really well with both cultures of the gyms. One, because the owners were able to appreciate the value without me having to explain a ton, which I think is the reason our pitches bombed the first time in terms of coming to the table as a physical therapist. But we were able to eventually leverage the fact that we were also strength and conditioning coaches. So fun fact, NYU made us all graduate with CSCS certifications through the NSCA. Yes, the NSCA. So I think it gave us a little bit more in the bargaining table in order to come in and say, like, "Hey, I'm familiar with Olympic lifts. I'm familiar with some of these movements. I know what you need to do, and I'm a physical therapist, so I can help you here." Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we'll answer that question, I guess, in a second.
Yeah.
Culture. With communication, being able to quickly assess and figure out whatever their needs are is really, really important. So especially in CrossFit, what Rena and I initially were thinking was that it's a population where everybody's hurt a lot, mostly because of either programming issues, programming issues, load management, and a combination of everything else in between. But being able to when we came into CrossFit Dynamics and CrossFit Concrete Jungle, we were like, "Hey, what are the most common injuries that your athletes deal with? What are your injury rates? Do you have athletes that have to take a step back from training?" And so when we were able to ask those questions and understand what those needs are, we were like, "All right, well, I'm a physical therapist. I can help you treat these athletes. I can help you continue to make money, basically, right? Because if we can treat your athletes and they can continue to train, and we don't say, 'Oh, well, you should never squat or deadlift,' then the gym can continue to make money, and we can also benefit as well from being in the space."
Definitely.
So between that and then timing honestly is everything. So sometimes people are in the right space to make those decisions, whether or not they had a fight with their girlfriend, or if they got enough sleep the other night, or even if they spent they had a budget and they spent a ton of it on equipment, but they were like, "Shoot, we could have totally used you." I've had plenty of pitches fall flat, mostly because I pitched to teams. Side note, Rena and I run sideline coverage and coverage for teams. So we'll run sideline coverage, sports performance, rehab. And I've reached out to so many soccer teams because I play soccer. I've reached out to so many teams, and they'll say, we just blew our budget on equipment, or we just brought another coach on. So timing is definitely everything. So, and then lastly, I think making sure that you can maintain or build relationships is really, really important. So it comes back to communication. And if you can come off as friendly as possible, but also as strong as possible, that makes you a very valuable person to be around, for sure.
Definitely. Well, Chris has a question, and thank you, Chris, for posting your question. We're super excited to try to answer it. So he says, looking to start a cash mobile practice in pediatrics and or telehealth. So, let's focus on that telehealth. So I think, or actually let's do peds first, because I think telehealth is, that is a little bit different in terms of building relationships. I think pediatrics, some ideas that I have, Erwin, off the top of my head, would be sort of similar to you. Like if you're looking to start a mobile practice that's for pediatrics, try to build relationships, say in schools, like special education schools.
Yep.
A lot of times I actually worked in special education before becoming a PT, and I would go into homes and do it was sort of a combination because I worked with infants. And so it was sort of like PT in the home. So I think connecting with schools, connecting with daycares. I don't know, what other ideas do you have to sort of start building relationships to help this pediatric business if someone was interested?
So I think one is that's really important too, and I'm sure you've had it addressed in an SSPT, is making sure you know who your ideal client is. So this is something. Am I chopping up, or am I good?
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. I just got a flashing thing that my connection was weird. So I'm sure for some of you that have seen that know Emma, obviously, have been through SSPT. I know that there's a whole focus on building your avatar or your ideal client. And so depending on who that ideal client is, so if you're looking to work in pediatrics, figuring out who you really enjoy working with and doesn't burn you out, because I'm sure for most of us that have been on here, there are definitely styles of clients that are just like, I can't do this. Like, I can only see them once a week and not 2 to 3 times a week. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what it's like to work with people 2 to 3 times a week in a rehab setting. I work with a couple of athletes 2 times a week, but figuring out who your ideal client is super important. So, like, I'm sure you can Google this also. So whoever your ideal avatar is, figuring out what their age is, gender, likes, dislikes, and this is all stuff you can Google as well between like ideal avatar generation. But like, figure out who that person is or who that child is. Is it, an 8 to 10-year-old that likes to play soccer, that is super active, they play video games with their friends, they love to eat pizza, and as detailed as you can get is really important, mostly because being able to pinpoint that ideal avatar can help you build everything around, like, your business, your brand,
your pitch, your business, your branding,
specifically to whoever you're trying to speak to. The only difference is, I think, with pediatrics is that it's kind of funky, mostly because you might have an ideal client, but the thing is, you're basically going to be pitching to whoever is making the financial decision. So everything kind of needs to be geared towards the child that you want to work with, but it also needs to speak to the parents, mother or father, whoever is making the final decision on that. So it's a little dicey for me. It's not something that I have a ton of experience in terms of generating brand for pediatrics, but that's definitely a place to start, figuring out who you want to pitch to. You had a really good point with, building connections to schools. I mean, like, if you are new to an area and you don't have connections, honestly, cold calling is the first place to start. Sometimes Facebook and social media is super amazing and people know everybody. So that's also important. So reaching out to your social media and your network can reap dividends. Like, people know people, and if you're an awesome person, most people are willing to help in any way, shape, or form, mostly because, side anecdote, we work with a professional ultimate frisbee team in New York City. We just won the national championship earlier this August, which was great. Yeah. So, but the reason I got connected with them was because I put out a post on Facebook before I sat for my SCS, and I need to have contact hours with teams. So I basically asked for any connections to teams, and this one person that I had played ultimate with in high school connected me with a player in New York City. This guy was a former coach of a now defunct team, but he put me in connection with his team, and all of a sudden, we've been with this team for 4 years. We run like all of their sports performance services. And so, yeah, like, you can't underestimate how awesome social media is and how powerful it is, for sure. Especially
connections. Yeah. Connections are huge. So helpful. Like, digging into who are your friends, your coworkers, your peers, everything else to start this. I think one of my biggest things is, a lot of times people, and it's even myself, like when I try to do all my debt-free PT stuff, I think that I have to have, everything said and be all perfect. And especially for like a cash-based practice, you could literally just start by having one client, seeing if you actually like it, doing it from 5 to 6 after work or 6 to 7 after
Yep.
work, and then build to a second, and then build to a third. And then when you start feeling like you've scaled, you've grown where you no longer need your full-time job, that's when you really start to make it a focus to build your brand and everything else. I think that's what I would say, sort of this trickle effect. Test it first, get one patient. If you can get that person to be a consistent client of yours, then you've got something, and then follow that same model with everyone else.
That's an amazing point, and that's how we started as well. So being involved in what we do, it literally started with like 2 to 3 hours a week, and I was charging $90. And so in New York State, the direct access law is 30 days or 10 visits, unless under a doctor's referral, and that's for 3 years post grad. So I got around it and I found very invested people, because when they came to me and they're like, "Oh, my shoulder's bothering me," I was like, "Go get a referral, and then we can talk." And so I started charging $90 an hour, which is a steal. And so being able to see people for something that they saw as a bargain, and then also continue to start to build that out. And once I realized that I could, make basically a day's worth of salary in like 2 to 3 hours of work, was like mind blowing, which was crazy. So, and that's also a really good point too, that sometimes like it's hectic, it's super hectic. It gets super stressful running your own practice, between trying to figure out books, trying to make sure that your social media is on point, making sure that your business is up and running, and that you're booking clients, you're continually reaching out to people, and it can be a huge drain. So starting super light, and even if it's like grocery money, and if that's the extent that you want to be involved in, that's great. Because what I found also is that this is not an easy path. I feel like most people get drawn to starting their own practice because they're like, "Oh yeah, I want to work less and I want to make a shit ton of money."
It's the opposite. You work more, right, Erwin?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm not swimming in dough yet, but the thing is, it took 6 years to get to a position where like we had a handful of spaces in New York City that we were able to sustainably build a reliable referral network where people actually trusted us, instead of just like showing up at gyms and like cold talking to people, be like, hey, like kind of like what trainers used to do, or still kind of do at like these big gyms, right? Globo gyms. So being able to start part-time, or even like less than part-time, right? And figure out if that is something that is for you, because sometimes it's not. It's honestly, some of the best advice that I got before I started my practice was that this path is very, very difficult, between not sleeping a ton and trying to balance my own health, versus like trying to make sure that I could get as many people in the door as possible, and like learning how to sell people on physical therapy. But to be fair, I don't refer to it offhand as physical therapy up front until people start asking, mostly because people have zero idea what we do as a profession still. Everybody thinks we're all modality based. They think we strap on electrodes, we put people on ultrasound and heat and stim and ice packs. It's a mess. And so trying to do our best in the cash practice realm is really, really important, because we're slowly changing people's views of physical therapy one at a time.
Awesome. I think that's there's a lot of stereotypes and stigmas. So having to overcome that, and once you overcome that, then then things can really start to grow. So I always, and please, more questions. So Chris, if we answered that, if not, post again. We'll be happy to keep commenting and helping you. Same with everyone else in the webinar. Please ask your questions and we'll help you. But one of the things that I always struggle with is charging money, because like some people have money, and especially like say New York City, it's a little bit more affluent for some locations. But how do you deal with that when you go to charge at, like, say, this pediatrics? I'm sure these parents don't have that much money. They're spending a lot of money on their kid, especially if, say, their kid has special needs. They're going to have even less money. So how do you frame that conversation with someone when you're trying to get a decent hourly rate and they don't have the money to pay for it?
One, I think this is a constant conversation that Rena and I have, and I have with other clinicians, in terms of ideally charging the rate that you want and that you feel like you're entitled to, right? So thanks, Chris. Glad we were able to answer that. So especially with building up your volume. So we started at 90 a session, and I would spend anywhere from like 60 minutes to 2 hours with those athletes. One, I definitely knew that I didn't have enough clinical experience to be able to make big decisions, but I think being able to make sure that I was making clinically sound decisions and making sure that the athlete was safe at all costs was really, really important. So when we decided to start raising our rates, a lot of it had to do with the value of my time. So being able to sit in my power and say, listen, an hourly one consultation to see me right now actually is $300. So, and I spend at least 60 to 90 minutes with those athletes because we pick through a ton of things. But building up to that was a process in terms of making sure that we had enough people on our schedule, but also had to value it, right? So if I have the limited availability, all of our time is super, super precious, and it's super, super valuable. So, and also the reason why we felt like we could charge a higher price point, one was because Chris Johnson was like, you should be charging less than $300 in New York City. Thanks, Chris. But also trying to make sure that my schedule wasn't full. I don't need to see 8 clients a day, although it would be nice. But honestly, in terms of my self-care and my my personal growth and being able to take care of myself, seeing 8 clients a day back to back to back is, one, for me, not responsible, because I know that after the 3rd or 4th client, like I can't give them much. And I'm sure I definitely remember working, again, like those 4 to 6 clients an hour, and I would get very frequently, especially on my early days from 7 to 4, like my 3 p.m., 3:15, 3 p.m., 3:20, 3:40s would be like, you're so dead. Like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And then, what's crazy would be they would come in the mornings for whatever reason. I had a handful. And they would be like, oh, wow, you have so much energy in the morning. Like, this is a completely different person. They're like, I don't want to come in the afternoons anymore. I didn't know how to answer that at the time. Yeah. But so, yeah, if I'm going to give my best care, I'm going to make sure that I get paid well and that I can fully give 100% of my attention to those clients and the athletes that we work with. Because if they're going to pay you a shit ton of money, which honestly, $300 is tiny in the scheme of things. If you think about bigger purchases, I don't know, probably your rent versus mortgage versus paying for a car, it's really not that big of a deal, especially when we think about getting people to reframe and invest in their health. But so building up to that was mostly personal. It was very selfish, and I think being able to be comfortable and say, hey, I don't need to see 30 people a day, I need to see 3, and that's going to be good for me, and I can give you the best care that I can give you. That was one of the big driving points of changing and upping our price, making sure that, and again, that's what people see. And in terms of stereotypes, back to our last point, that's what people see. They see a mill, and they see one therapist on one person directing 4 or 5 other clinicians, and that's what I wanted to be. And then I knew after my first fulfill, I think, and even after that first job, it was something that I just didn't want to do, and I just didn't feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're getting at is if you're going to provide a premium service, you have to charge a premium amount, and I think what Erwin did is you built up to it. So you started at 90, which in New York you can do that. So I don't think a lot of other places you
do that
can't
anywhere.
necessarily. You could do it anywhere. I think you'd have a little bit more pushback, but it all just depends,
Right.
and that's me. I'm the worst seller in the world, but I think you have to give results. And when you start giving results, then they'll start paying you. So for the example, the pediatric practice, if you start all of a sudden, the kid wasn't walking, and then 1 to 2 sessions later, all of a sudden the kid is walking, boom, right there, that
Right.
parent is probably going to be willing to continue to pay that $100 because you've just transformed their child and you gave them a solution, or you gave them a cure, or you helped them in such a huge way. And it's the same with an athlete. And so I think when you really drive results, then I think that's when you can start being like, this is my prices. Thanks.
100%. I think so. It's also interesting too is that now that we've developed a rep in New York City, people will come to us and they're like, "Oh, you're very highly recommended. I want to work with you," but we'll still get pushback. People say, "Oh, this is like $300 a session is too expensive." So honestly, the best thing you can do, like unless you're a very, very good negotiator, and even then, I don't recommend that people or clinicians negotiate their rates because it doesn't
awkward.
It doesn't put you in a position of like less power, but it puts both of you in a situation where your expectations and your values are not in line. And then that can lead to poor experiences, because I've done it before where I've discounted rates for people because they were a friend of a friend, and they came into it with expectations of a discount, which puts us again on a back foot. So I think being able to, again, like sit in our power and sit with confidence and say, hey, this is what it is. Like, here's some other options. If you want to pay less, this is what you're going to get. And again, being comfortable with that and not coming off. For me, I can come off a little abrasive to some people, but being able to say like, listen, if you want a premium product, you have to pay a premium price. And frequent analogy I use is like, if you walk into a BMW dealership because you want an M5, which is a very nice car, you're not going to walk in and say, I really like that M5, but I'm going to pay you $40,000 for it because that's all I got. They're going to laugh you out the dealership. And so I think if we offer the product that we want, or that these clients or even athletes or kids want, you have to be comfortable with your rate, and people can sense that too, especially when you're super uncomfortable giving that off. I've recorded with permission, recorded conversations with people and with clients, just so I could hear myself. And you can hear when everything goes absolutely downhill, because you're like, oh shoot, and that's where I lost this sale. I think that's really, really important.
Awesome. Well, your time is super valuable, Erwin. So everyone, we have just a couple last minutes with Erwin. So if you do have a pressing question, put it in the chat or the Q&A and we'll answer it. But to summarize, Erwin, so what would sort of be like 3 main important things that someone should focus on right now if they're interested in transitioning to some sort of cash practice?
You're never going to, I think you're never going to be 100% ready. So at least just start.
Yeah.
Either start seeing those 1 or 2 clients, even if they're friends and you are charging them like $20, because you can start to develop your brand and your model. So a little bit of self-promotion aside, I do run and we talked about this, I think, Emma, I do run basically a mentor / branding course to help clinicians build their own practice and their own brand. The reason is because if you know who your ideal avatar is, and you know who you are as a clinician, then you can start to have that basic conversation with people in terms of, okay, this is who I am, this is what I want to be, this is who I want to sell to. Now I can start eventually reaching out to those potential clients. So one, yes, I think you need to start seeing see anybody, and so you can start developing your experience, your user experience, basically. 2, I think you Most clinicians should definitely get a mentor. I think having a mentor or even somebody to use as a soundboard is really, really important. Or even find other clinicians that are really, really great at what they do, so you can start to learn from them. That's piece number 2. I think piece number 3. Definitely
build relationships, maybe.
Yeah, I think building relationships is a good one. Yeah, I think that's a great one. In terms of, just talk to people and be comfortable asking questions. Oh, actually, no. I like building relationships, but I think the third one should be ask. Just ask.
Yeah.
So especially when it comes to who we mostly are as people, I think we're very humble. We're very quiet, but learning how to ask for things, connections, asking people for referrals, like, hey, do you have any friends that might need anything, or do you know any other athletes? Do you know any teams? Chris, if you're looking into pediatrics, like reaching out to social media and saying, hey, like, does anybody have any connections to, special ed schools or something like that. I would also recommend, like, I think Facebook groups are super important. That was kind of a segue that I wanted to come back to. I forgot what I was
Yeah, they're an easy way to ask without feeling intimidated. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, Facebook groups are great. Reddit is also important too. There's so many groups on Reddit where you can jump into basically a population of people, whether or not it's like weightlifting or Olympic weightlifting or ultimate frisbee or rugby. There are so many people. So just putting out feelers and asking is really, really important. There's one more question.
Awesome. Yay, one more question. Last question. So Anna D says, I'm a new grad and don't have much of a following yet. Is it possible for me to start a cash-based practice? Totally. Would like to do a concierge practice for women in the reproductive years. So, definitely. I think, that is huge right now, actually. It's growing so much, especially women after birth, too. We have a lot of women that are wanting to regain their abdominal muscles, all sorts of different things. You have, the precautions leading up to birth. You have a lot of athletes, maybe even some athletes, Erwin, where it's women want to stay fit through their pregnancy.
Oh yeah. It's there's so many female there's I think there's an under tapped population in the female especially with women in their reproductive year / female athletes, or even niche stuff, postpartum. Pelvic floor health is starting to become much more mainstream as opposed to when I was in school in 2013. So yeah, there's so much of a there's so many niches for you to potentially get into. So yeah, again, where I started was literally just, if somebody was hurt, go see your doctor, get a referral, and then come see me, and then we can start working together. And then figuring that out is really, really important. So yeah, it's totally easy to just finish school and start to figure it out. I think one of the biggest disclaimers and caveats that I want to put out there and make sure that everybody watching knows is that Instagram makes this entrepreneur hustle look super fucking, but it's really not. And practices don't pop up overnight unless you have a ton of connections or even a ton of investor capital, which I've seen some clinicians do, which is great. There's a clinician here in New York City that finished school and started working with professional athletes right off the bat, and he runs a very successful concierge practice. So and I found myself at some of those points during the formation of my practice. I was like, fuck, how did he get those connections? But a lot of it really has, some people, the running joke, especially in business, is it's definitely who you know. And again, so maybe if there was a fourth point, I think relationships and who you know is very, very important.
Yeah.
But it also comes to asking. Sure.
Definitely. I mean, I think for you, Annette, is the first place I would start is definitely Google, like Erwin said. And I can't remember her name, but there are some huge women right now doing pelvic floor $1 million. There's this woman that does pelvic floor, and she's like $1 million PT, and she's massive. So Google pelvic floor physical therapist, and I think it's like pelvic floor guru or something like that, or pelvic, something like that. Google that and take a look at what they did, and almost try to see if you can go back to their very first post, if you go back to their very beginning, and try to like watch some of their first videos, things like that. And what did they do? And start copying that. Erwin's exactly right that there are so many niches you could go into. I wouldn't start to do pelvic floor yet, because as a new grad, you're not quite as experienced in that, but take some more continuing education, get some more certifications underneath your belt, because that's huge. And start to decide, do you want to do mothers? Do you want to do pre or post partum? Do you want to do athlete mothers? And you don't even have to even niche down that much, but like, once again, find your avatar. And what I would start doing is going into doctors' offices and just sort of starting that conversation, especially like maybe OBGYNs, excuse me, and starting to just build that relationship there. Social media, I think, is really good, but I think looks can be deceiving with clients. And I also think sometimes there's a lot of liability that comes dependent upon what type of videos you're producing. You have to be very careful with physical therapy videos and liability there. And you also have to be careful that people aren't just going to watch your videos and not want to come to your practice to actually seek the treatment that they need. So that's just some little bits.
Yeah. Some thoughts. One thought there, actually. That's actually a discussion Rena and I had with other clinicians in terms of putting material out there. I think the caveat and the other side to that is that the best analogy that I have is a plumber. And so if your sink explodes and you don't know how to do it yourself, you have to call somebody, right? So maybe you call your dad or whatever. Maybe your dad doesn't know how to fix it, or you call your brother or somebody. Neighbor doesn't know how to fix it. So you have to call a plumber, right? And the plumber is going to come in and they're going to look at it and they're going to say, all right, well, it's going to cost you this much. So, or you could go onto YouTube and see like, all right, well, how do I fix this sink? And so the caveat on the other side of that is that anybody can look up rehab exercises, but nobody knows how to put them together better than us.
Yeah.
And so people are coming to us because we're the specialists, or we can help with that. Obviously, now there's a ton of other healthcare professionals in the space that think that, or that can practice rehab, which is fine, but we need to be able to operate and own our space and be good at what we do. So going back to what you said is, in terms of giving results, like that's the end all be all with our clients. Like if you can come in, or if they come in to see you and you can help them understand what's going on, and that's a whole nother Pandora's box we would go into, but like help them understand what's going on, potentially treat the issue, and then give them some things to do. That's, and they leave you feeling better. That's huge. It's massive. So
and I think video, and we could keep talking obviously, and I know you have to go, but I think video is really huge, because showing that you're a person, showing sort of how you communicate, how you work is huge. Like anytime before I buy anything now, I Google and I YouTube and I look up videos on that product. And when I like the person, I will be willing to buy. And so I definitely think it's good to have some pictures, have some videos, but especially when you're starting, I think it can be overwhelming. Like that's how I feel sometimes, is I'm like, I've got to do Instagram, I've got to do YouTube, I've got to do Facebook, I've got to do webinars, I've got to do blogging. And it ends up that I do none of it well. And so I think, get a couple clients and then just sort of take it slowly from there, and then build out your brand slowly from there. But awesome.
If I could give one more piece, I would say be comfortable failing.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a lot of entrepreneur. I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur, but that's a lot of what entrepreneurship is, in terms of like really testing shit and seeing if it sticks to the wall, and if it doesn't, then you have to figure out another solution. So failure is is not an end. It's definitely something. It can show you something. There's always something to be gleaned. And so again, like to go back to earlier with pitching to all these gyms, like I learned how to pitch really well because I fucked up a bunch. I just fucked up so much. So pardon my French, but yeah, like it's if you're afraid to fail, it's definitely it's going to be something that's going to handcuff you, especially if you want to start your own practice. So definitely don't be afraid to fail. Put yourself out there, ask questions. Yeah, man, just go for it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to like it. Nobody's making you be an entrepreneur. And what's great is that we can all work a full-time job somewhere, because there are so many places we can work. So you can always find somebody to work for sure.
Exactly. Test it out. You get 1-2 clients, you don't enjoy it, you didn't mess up anything, and just go back to doing your regular 9 to 5. Well, Erwin, it's always a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to catch up. And everyone, thank you again for being on this webinar. Let's give Erwin a round of applause. Yay. And he really is a really awesome master brander. I got to pick your brain about branding actually soon. But so check out MatchFit Performance too, if you want to sort of emulate his model. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.
Yeah. Bye.
Now I always have to find how to end the recording.
Oh no.
Oh, here it is.